On today's episode of 5 Tips for Playing the Tuba, I'm thrilled to welcome JáTtik Clark, principal tuba player of the Oregon Symphony Orchestra in Portland, Oregon. JáTtik and I actually go way back, and we'll get into that here in a little while. But first of all, before we get into the 5 tips, I always love to discuss one of my favorite things to talk about, especially when we're talking to such accomplished musicians. How did you start on the tuba?
Well, first off, welcome to you, Jerome. It's great to see you again. I think it's been maybe about a couple of years since you last physically came through in Portland, but I remember that visit very fondly. It's great to see you, and
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there, such as we are, getting into January 2021. Let's hope this is a much better year than the last one. That's it for sure. But how I started on the tuba, well, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, you thought about changing that question to how were you tricked into playing the tuba. And I won't say that I was tricked in my particular case, but so in our music program back in Hartsville, South Carolina, which is where I grew up, of course we're both from South Carolina, we started in the 7th grade. Maybe some kids might start a little earlier, but I started in 7th grade, and I knew that I wanted to play the saxophone. I just knew that was the cool instrument. That was the instrument that everybody wanted to play. Pretty much, 90% or more of the kids all wanted to play saxophone. So I went in to meet with the band director, Miss Penny Rogers, and she had me try the various, instrument reeds, mouthpieces, and such. And so I get to the tuba mouthpiece and pick it up, and she describes how to make a buzz. I'm sure it probably didn't sound like that, but whatever came out, her eyes just sort of bugged out a little bit, and she thought, that could be a good fit for you. It probably didn't hurt the fact that in 7th grade I was not at my current size, but pretty close to it, so I could actually pick up a tuba and carry it and not like crush myself or anything. So I mean that's part of the game. You got to have a certain physical strength. But anyway, I still chose saxophone as my first choice. Tuba was my second choice, and trombone was my third. And of course, I didn't know about that well-known band maxim that states if a kid shows even an ounce of interest in tuba, you put them on tuba. So I ended up being assigned to tuba, and I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a try. And of course, here we are, many years later.
That's awesome. That's an awesome story. I've never heard that when it comes to band programs, and it's been really interesting as a teacher because I'm definitely coming across more and more kids who are, really excited about starting the tuba, and they don't want to play anything else. That's what they pick from day one. So it's been a great journey. I can't say that about many current professionals. But that's a fantastic story. So just like you mentioned, we're both from South Carolina, and you and I actually met when I was in 8th grade, and I think you might have been in 11th grade, and we were fortunate enough to be in a youth orchestra that was a really good youth orchestra, but also I feel like because the conductor didn't really want to say no to any kid that really wanted to do it, we had at one point 3 tubas and a euphonium player, Jason Ham, very accomplished West Point euphonium player, soloist.
Yeah.
But he was also in the group. Jason and I are the same age. But anyway, that was just such an important experience for me to learn and play next to somebody who was so incredibly talented. So obviously we know each other from youth orchestra, and then you ended up going to the University of South Carolina, right?
Yes, I did my undergrad at University of South Carolina with Dr. Ron Davis, and I think he might even still be there. I'm not
Dr.
sure.
Davis is still there, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, long time. But yes, University of South Carolina for my undergrad. Started out as a music education, but switched to performance, I wanted to play, and I figured that out finally and committed to it. And then I did my my master's at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, which is the full official title, CCM for short, much easier on the tongue. And then I was extremely fortunate in getting the Oregon Symphony gig just as I was finishing my master's at CCM. So.
I remember that audition very, very well because, you know, there's just so many fantastic tuba players. And I think that might have been my second professional audition. I do want to ask you two questions
Okay.
just to kind of follow up with some of the things that you talked about. So you mentioned that you were a music education major and then you switched over to performance. So if you could tell us a little bit more about what went into that decision. We certainly have a lot of students that usually, hopefully, watch these videos. So tell us about that decision process.
Sure. Well, in general, I'll just back up a little bit more and say that as soon as I could basically walk and talk, I knew that I was going to go into medicine. You know, that was my big interest. Wanted to be a doctor. Wasn't sure what type. Maybe an obstetrician because of the Cosby Show influence. You know, back then, such a positive role model. Of course, at the time, with his show. For us. But I guess around 11th grade, I knew that music was becoming more and more important in my life. Playing in band, going to All-State, having a lot of success with it, and I kind of came to a crossroads in terms of, do I go with music or do I go with medicine? And ultimately, I decided that for me, music was my true love and my true calling. But at the time, everybody had suggested that I go the education route because, with a music ed degree, you have the option of teaching at some level, elementary school or high school, junior high level, with music education. It's no secret that there's just not many performance jobs, and probably in the current times, maybe even less so. It's a very unstable career in some ways, as many of us in the orchestral field found out, right around March of last year, how unstable things could be depending on the situation in the world. But anyway, I ultimately decided to go with music, and I figured education seemed like the sound choice in terms of, if I was going to get a degree in college, something that was going to be, worth its salt. But again, in my heart, I had zero desire to be a band director, and that's no knock against band directors. I think that's a very important job, and it should be left to those that have that true calling and have, that true nature to want to do that. But when I started to take education classes, I just knew that this is getting me further away from what I really want to do. And I remember talking with Dr. Davis and talking with some of the other instrumental teachers, in the brass department, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't, chasing running a fool's errand. I wanted to make sure that they felt that I had the talent, had the ability to do it. And everybody indicated that I had the talent, but just understand that there's some very talented people that never get a job. It's the reality. And I ultimately accepted that and said, okay, I'm going to go for it. And if it doesn't work out, I'll find something that I can enjoy. But, at a certain point, I just had to, sort of leave the barn and burn it down and start my journey.
That's really interesting. So obviously you had a lot of support, great mentorship in South Carolina. And, I can certainly understand going to a great music school and obviously studying with Dr. Davis, since, being in South Carolina, just all the tuba players, younger tuba players in the state definitely knew him. How did you make the decision to leave South Carolina and go to Cincinnati for your master's?
Well, it was fairly simple. Part of it was expense, and affordability. At the time, CCM, I want to say maybe 99% of the graduate students there went tuition free. And another concern for me was, I needed to get my, I bought my first tuba as a graduate student. Before then, I had been using school equipment all the way, and so that was another concern, was having, not wanting to go too far into school debt, to pursue this stream in these degrees. But I remembered meeting Tim Northcutt, who teaches at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, CCM. I met him at the 1995 ITech conference in Chicago. I think that was at Northwestern, if I remember correctly. My tuba quartet from the University of South Carolina was in the competition, the quartet competition. And so we all got to go, and at some point I met Tim, and he talked to me about CCM, and I played for him at some eventual point. What ultimately brought me to Cincinnati was mainly Tim as a teacher, but great school, affordable, wonderful program there, lots of playing opportunities, and just having that access to Indiana and Perrintone.
There are some great players at Cincinnati. I mean, there have always been great players at CCM for sure. So it's always good to hear how certain people end up where they were at whatever particular time in their career. So then you win the Oregon Symphony, which we can fast forward to current day JáTtik Clark. So in addition to the symphony, what else are you doing?
Well, a little bit of teaching. I'm currently employed at 5 higher institutions of learning.
Just a little bit of teaching.
Just a little bit.
And what are those schools?
Okay, so in the order that I was hired, Portland State University, Oregon State University, Lewis and Clark College, University of Portland, and most recently Mount Hood Community College.
Wow. So from what little I know just from you naming the schools, I can imagine that they're drastically different. They probably have different needs as far as their music department goes. So obviously that keeps you really busy, and that's not even your full-time job, which is playing with the Oregon Symphony. I've been very fortunate from your invitation to have performed with the group. So some of the highest standards of any orchestra. In fact, I had the opportunity to play with Maestro James DePriest, which was quite an amazing experience. So I know that your band, again, maintains some of the highest standards. So I'm sure it's a very intricate balancing act for you to do everything that you're doing as well as maintaining your chops. So I think that's an appropriate segue to the topic of our video, the focus of our video series. This is number 4. So I'll ask you the same question that I ask all the other fantastic musicians that we've had on the show. If you could only practice 5 things on the tuba, what would those 5 things be?
Well, not to come onto your show and instantly hijack the topic, as it were, but I've seen some of the earlier episodes, and they've been wonderful, and there have been some wonderful tips there. And I guess what I'd like to do is a potential alternative is to present maybe 5 tips. Maybe not all 5 of them, but at least some of them might be some tips that we may not automatically think of when one thinks of the basics of playing. Just maybe come at it from a different angle to present some alternative things to consider.
Awesome.
Or at the very least, maybe take an old tire and get new tread out of it. Maybe come at it some different ways. But I guess the first thing, obviously, is as someone, as you mentioned, doesn't have necessarily a whole lot of time these days to practice all day. It's nice when you can. If we talk a little bit about the embouchure itself and the buzzing and the source of the vibration, the source of everything that we do, the source of life as a musician, at least in terms, well, in most cases, something has to vibrate. In the case, our embouchure. So really, sort of trying to maximize the efficiency and free up everything so that it's all responsive instantly in terms of what you want to do, and everything is happening and functioning at a high level. So often with students, I'll always like to start with just a little bit of buzzing at the beginning, just to kind of promote that vibration, get them moving the lips. So And I know that some people find that the free buzzing in particular is a little more controversial versus buzzing on, say, a mouthpiece or a rim. And I certainly employ those as well. But I think maybe just a hint of free buzzing is not the worst thing in the world, as long as you, of course, explain to the students that it's, it's overtraining. It's all overtraining. And so the idea isn't to be working that hard, when we come to the instrument. You swing the 3 bats to warm up, then you go up to the plate, you drop 2 of the bats, and then it's much easier to swing that one. So for example, just kind of shaking things out. And then sort of starting to figure out, lower register to higher register. Just kind of sort of have them figure out how to, find those, figure out, the low note, start to connect pitch to lip.
Wonderful. So this is pretty much the very first thing.
Oh, just to, once we've done some breathing to start off, of course, because of course with buzzing we got to have fuel, and you want to make sure that you're breathing properly. But in terms of when we start to to motivate the buzz, after some breathing exercises, of course, whatever you like to do, maybe just a little bit of free buzzing in conjunction with, of course, the main thing being probably the mouthpiece and the rim buzzing, before going to the instrument. But,
okay. Any specific breathing exercises that you like to do?
Well, with breathing, it's mostly kind of early breathing gym type stuff, breathing for the capacity with the arms so that they get a sense of the vision in terms of, coming to completely full, to completely empty, and varying the counts so that as they measure their arms, they're also thinking of measuring their capacity and being able to have more and more control over set capacity, over the lungs, in terms of deflate, blowing out, and inflation, deflation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Breathing, free buzzing, and then do you transition to buzzing on the mouthpiece, or then at this point do you go straight to the horn?
A little bit of mouthpiece as well, obviously, but sort of that same thing. Now I like to do like a lot of glissandes, just to try to fill in. I talk about everybody has spots in their buzz, whether it be free or on the rim or on the mouthpiece, that are deader, spots that are more resonant and lifelike, spots that are deader. So we want to fill in those dead spots. I like to talk about the sonic bondo, like on a car. We want to fill in those dents, smooth things.
Sonic bondo.
Yes.
You have to explain. I don't. That's a new one.
Well, I think it's called bondo when you have like dents in like your car surface, and you want to smooth that out. So you fill in those dents with this, putty-like material, and then you smooth it over, paint it, and then it looks as though you've got a nice smooth surface. Whereas before you had dings and dents and scratches and what have you. So we want that sort of tonal sonic bondo. The idea is taking the spots that work well and spreading it into the spots that maybe not respond as well. Okay. Is what I'm trying to get at. But,
wow. Okay, wow, that's a great way of thinking about it. That's new to me. That's really interesting. So what about when you eventually move over to the tuba?
Okay. Well, with the horn, obviously, again, it's the same things. Long tones, slow slurs, scales, chromatics, stuff like that. But one thing, I guess, if we're gonna maybe move to the second tip, I like to do a lot of lip slurs / lip bends, shawarma type stuff. Again, kind of trying to bring the freeness and the fretlessness of the mouthpiece to the instrument, because once we hook things up to an instrument, we've got harmonic series to deal with, and things kind of start locking into place. But I want to promote that we're playing not so much the tuba, but the embouchure, and that the tuba is mainly amplification and some resistance. But I think often we let the resistance and the metal control the mind rather than the other way around.
Absolutely.
Mind controlling the metal. Because again, I always talk to the students and say that, look, you know, the horn that you hold in your hand is always the second instrument. That's always the copy of what you should be, visualizing and hearing. Here you play this instrument first, the mental. And as with any copy, you always lose a little resolution. So it is vital that we have as clear a picture here, and here, and here as possible. It's like the mind, the heart, the ear all connect. We breathe for the fuel, stimulate the vibration here, and then all of that, goes into the instrument, to the mouthpiece.
That's a really, really interesting way and a very simple way of thinking about it. So could you give us an example of lip slurs or lip bends that you would do? Say, for example, you're having a very busy day of teaching and rehearsals, maybe a concert in the evening, and you only have time to practice one of these 5 things. So you had mentioned lip slurs or lip bends. If you can give us an example, that'd be wonderful.
From day to day, I like to change it up, do different things, but I would say Bailin has come up more recently, and for those who don't know, Bailin, Bailin is a Chinese trumpet teacher, and he wrote a book of just exhaustive lip slurs. It's like well over 30 pages of them. They're incredible. Written in treble clef, so you got to learn a little bit of treble clef, but it's good for you. It's good for you. Anyway, I think that starting one, if I'm remembering it correctly. Down a half step. And then, of course, if I think about, of course, they get more and more complicated. There's one that reminds me of an exercise that's in Charlie Vernon's singing approach to the trombone. And just sort of, figure that out, work it out. And then again, just, I think the main thing we're practicing is do something a little different every day, not just retread the same material, explore, and just experiment.
Wow, wonderful. I've been listening to you play for many, many, many years. Again, since I was, probably 13 years old. And your sound has always been so amazing. And as a professional tuba player, to listen to you play, it's just always been such an even sound from register to register, regardless of the dynamic, regardless of the type of articulation you're going for. You've always had such an even sound. Would you credit doing the lip smears and the flexibility, would you say that has a lot to do with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would. And actually, I just thought about something else in this regard. Another story time for you. A wonderful I've had a chance to work with him from time to time, even though we play in different orchestras. But Bill Cavallero is the principal horn in the Pittsburgh Symphony. Wonderful musician, wonderful teacher, wonderful human being. And I remembered just asking him a question kind of similar to what you just said. I said, Bill, your sound at whatever dynamic or whatever range you're coming in is always so pure and just so sure. There's just no hint of ever you being off center or off target. How do you do that? How do you get to that level? And I figured it might be some complicated answer. He just said lip bends. 2 words, lip bends, and he showed me a couple things, and it was like, okay, so.
Wow. Okay, so you have to give us an example. What type of lip bend would you recommend? If I've never done them before, where should I start?
Oh wow. Well, I would say if I would go to the brass gym for a moment, the shawarma exercise, which that's a nice one because they call it the best tone builder in the book, and again I agree, and of course that's a lip bend that really forces you into some maybe some uncharted waters because you're literally trying to play notes on the wrong fingering, as it were. Obviously, just to describe it for those who don't know, you take, for example, you start on like your G natural and you go to an F sharp, C tuba, of course, open the second valve. And then you play another measure of that, but you stay on the G fingering for both notes. So the idea is to make the bent notes sound as good as the finger notes. And of course, they present it in one way, but as I understand it, that book is kind of like stage one, level one, and there's things you can do to make it a little more complicated to raise the stakes. For example, if I were to mix that, instead of playing a measure of valve notes and then a measure of bent notes, mixing it in. Something like that to really try to do that direct comparison. You can add notes. Because I usually like, if I can bend a few steps versus just the one, of course it's going to make that first step even much easier if you bend it a little further. But again, this will really help with some of that sonic bondo that I was talking about earlier.
I can't wait to use that in lessons. I think that's fantastic. So, just out of curiosity, how much of your time would you say that you would, if you had like an average practice session, how much of your time would you spend doing lip slurs and lip bends?
Usually, because the sessions tend to be unfortunately kind of abbreviated. You can find, 15 minutes here or 20 minutes there. I would say typically it's going to be maybe no more than one or two exercises, but I really try to be exhaustive in terms of going through, let's say, a full chromatic series. So at least that way I'm going from my shortest instrument to my longest instrument. So really getting into, I notice if I notice this also with euphonium players, since I teach a few of those as well. They tend to avoid that compensation register, because it doesn't feel very good because of the resistance. We as tubists often avoid the longer fingerings because we don't use those as much. But again, that's kind of like swinging the three bats. The better we can sound in that knuckle register,
right?
Then the much it's like if I can make that sound like $1 million, then that's going to be $1 billion. Think of adjusting for inflation.
Right. I spend a lot of time working with high school and middle school tuba players and euphonium players. And they all have 4 valves. When they do their flexibility exercises in band class, of course, they're only going down to the 3 valve combination for the trumpet players that they're playing with. So we just spend a lot of time just going through the fingerings. So this is really, really great stuff. Now, do you have anything specifically for doing something with, getting into the 4th and 5th valve on the tuba, or is it more that you're just making sure that you're doing flexibility with all your valves down?
I think mainly I would say, whatever pattern you ultimately decide on, be exhaustive and go all the way through it. I've as of late, our wonderful shared colleague, Mr. Chris Oka has been putting out some wonderful, drills of the week. For example, I think he's got a website now, and you can actually buy the PDFs for the music. Of course, I encourage everybody to, learn it by ear, so that you have it, more, when we learn things by memory, we get the music out of the way, and we have a much better connection to the music, in general. So I encourage that anyway. But again, just being thorough, being exhaustive, and just going through. For example, let's take his duck and weave exercise. Actually, I probably should have given myself a little more food.
Incredibly even.
Thanks. We tried.
Really, really fantastic. Wow. I mean, it's so obvious to me that if you can play in that register, and I mean, we're not even talking about the finger flexibility that has to get incorporated for your technique down there. When you drop the other two bats, everything is going to feel like you're swinging for the fence, right? Everything's going to be a home run. So,
call your shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, it takes a while to get to that point, and just understand. Of course, Rome wasn't built in a day or a year or a century, even. But of course, being patient with your growth. It's something that we always hear. We don't always like to listen to it, but we gotta, just if you can grow 0.0001%, but you do that every day, 1,000-mile journey begins with that single step. Just start walking. Don't worry about. Sometimes you just can't really worry about the destination. Just take the journey. Enjoy yourself along the way. But yeah, I just realized that now. Usually, not in the course. Chris doesn't usually go that far with some of the exercises, but as an additional challenge, I encourage. It's like, why not? Just again, it's a word that I love to use is things aren't really hard. They're just unfamiliar. So, just once you familiarize yourself with it and live with it, feel the pain for a bit, you'll figure it out. And it makes the impossible just difficult, and it makes the difficult way easier. So.
It makes the difficult way easier. That's a great way to really think about a lot of these things, and just enjoying the journey, because it will never happen after 1 or 2 or maybe even 100 sessions. So that's great stuff. So moving on, we talked a lot about buzzing, some free buzzing, flexibility, lip bends, all wonderful things. What would you say number 3 would be for you?
I would say, again, simple melodies. Something we as tuba players aren't often encountering, at least in band or even in orchestra, other than just, solos, but just really trying to make sure that we find a little bit of time to really play something as a melodic, as a lead instrument. We don't do that often enough. Granted, because most of us, in terms of our jobs, that's not our function, but occasionally solos do happen, and I think we definitely cut ourselves short, because the tuba, while it is generally monochromatic, can still lend itself to be a very highly expressive and wonderful instrument, wonderful vehicle for that. So, and again, just kind of connected with the buzzing, along with doing just simple drills and chromatic things, glissandi, do something truly melodic on the mouthpiece, just to get the students right away to be thinking, again, lead. Don't just start, don't be content with just being like the foundation of the pyramid. I mean, that is our job, that is our function, and in that role, we want to be superlative at it. But take the time to, again, tip that pyramid upside down, and live as a soloist, instrument. For example, melody I just came across. I just rediscovered magic flute. Maybe not something quite that low to begin with, but but something like that. And then of course eventually bring that to the instrument, and then of course you need to know the valves and the actual notes. But again, search that freedom, be truly melodic. It can be anything. I was just talking about this with my quintet. In fact, last night, I was just telling them. I think somebody brought up that we recently lost MF Doom. I don't know if you were familiar with him as an artist, as a rapper, kind of underground, but it kind of reminded me that as a young tubist, I went home and I was listening to a lot of rap, a lot of hip hop, in my day, which always had the really groovy bass lines. And I would learn these by ear, and I would go back to school the next day and play them on the tuba, during break. And certain kids would recognize the melodies and start dancing and getting into it. So that was my ear training, from the before I even knew what that was, just playing these bass lines. I was thinking about, for example, I had to do like also in college I had to do in the ear training. I did this project for my final grade. The professor gave us an option of we could take a tape home, and if we do the transcription, we wouldn't have to come in and do the final. And he liked like 70s and 80s sitcom themes and stuff like that. So he gave me Barney Miller.
Okay.
So that bass line. And so that so again, so the tubas that come from certain maybe ethnic backgrounds, like you have banda music, with the wonderful tuba bass lines, you have rap and hip hop with those bass lines, anything jazz, doesn't matter. Just with a mouthpiece, what's nice is you don't have to think about the fingers. You just have your ear and you can get in there and just play that stuff. So again, thinking melodically. Yeah.
Thinking melodically, and then do you play them on the tuba as well? I mean,
yeah. Eventually.
Okay.
Yeah, just work the, figure out what key you're in. I fortunately I was blessed with a pretty decent ear, and I somehow kept cultivating that as a player. But I think Brian Bowman said this to a student of mine in a lesson. You're only as good as your ear. And your ability to be able to ascertain, both literally hear the pitches, and of course hear what type of sound you want, and also that includes the mind's ear as well. Not to get too metaphysical, but yeah.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so what has always really impressed me is that eventually the more my guests have gone through what they really work on to just maintain their chops, and again just paring it down to the essential aspects of practicing the essential things that they need to do as far as practicing goes, it inevitably becomes a picture of what you need to do to be the complete musician, right? Developing your ear, developing a sound, whether we're talking about evenness of sound or what have you. But it always ends up being, okay, what do you need to do to be a total, complete professional musician? So that brings us to number 4. What would you move on to next?
Well, scales.
Scales.
You know, I happen to love scales. You know, I know that many of us don't. You know, if only I could infuse my students with that same love. You know, because literally it's a language. You know, we would never allow a student to pass English if they only knew maybe 20 of the 26 or so, you know, letters, 24 letters, 26 letters of the alphabet. You know, you got to have them all, and with scales, again, you know, try to memorize them, and again, approach them from all sorts of directions, all sorts of variances. You know, you got 16 patterns in the Oregon. That's a great start. Bill Bell scales, wonderful approach. You know, again, the main thing is to do it, and if you need variation, there's plenty of it, but just, you know, get a little bit every day of scales. One thing I do like to do, just to save a little bit of time, is I'll sometimes, you know, I'll interweave scales. So maybe instead of, you know, I might go up in one scale, come down in another, up in another, you know, just as an example. And so forth, and just, you know, different patterns, half steps, fifths, fourths, that kind of thing. But in all my warm-ups, there's invariably, and I'll say one other thing. Let's not forget the mother scale, the chromatic scale. I really feel that the chromatic scale should be the first scale that everybody learns. Typically, it's probably the B flat major scale because most of us start on B flat tuba. But if you learn the chromatic scale, you've got all your notes. You know,
right.
And then B naturals and E naturals and F sharps aren't so mystical and like, well, what is that? You know, so you know, I really like doing chromatics. So you can do it the same way. And so forth. But just, again, pianists, typically the very first thing you hear them play is chromatics and scales, just going up and down the keyboard, just getting a lay of the land. You know, so with the, you know, and the chromatic scale, if you only play one scale, I tell you, that's the scale I would work on.
I've never heard of it referred to as the mother scale, but I definitely like that. That's definitely another thing that I'm going to steal. And but I will credit anything. I never really steal any ideas from anybody because I normally credit, you know, as many people as I can.
We've all treaded this material before, and it's all, you know, you've got certain maybe mother sources like, you know, Jacobs or Bell, or you know, there's so many wonderful teachers and pedagogues out there, and I've learned from all of them. And I don't know who was who, you know, maybe in some cases we're not sure who the very first person was that came up with the said idea. But you know, we're all standing on the shoulders of those that came before us, right? And then eventually we're going to put somebody up on ours. So
absolutely,
we pay it forward. So
absolutely,
very important. Yeah.
So when it comes to scales, you said sometimes in order to save some time, you mix the scales. So is this something that you definitely play? You definitely do scales every day, no matter what?
Some type some type of way every day, you know, because again, you know, if we're going to preach this to the students, you know, and that's how and again, that's virtually probably the first melody that we learn, in a sense, is, you know, hey, these notes go together in a particular way. And whether it's, pattern, intonation in terms of if you want to, make, do the just intonation, the fine tuning, with scales, and just trying to find the scales and everything that we play, so that we're just much better connected to it. But yeah, some sort of scale pattern every day is a must.
Great. So that pretty much brings us to number 5. Then we've talked about buzzing, lip bends. We've talked about the importance, especially for tuba players, of thinking melodically, buzzing melodies, playing melodies. And what I love about what you said, JáTtik, is that it doesn't really matter where that melody comes from, which I think is great. And then melodies are based on scales.
Yeah, I would say that, find something that speaks to you, find that connection. We tend to play with more conviction when we have an actual connection emotionally, with what we're doing. And the best musicians have a way of doing that with pretty much everything they play. As I sometimes tell students, we don't always like what we play in our music folders, like at the orchestra and such. We may not personally like it, but we still need to play it with conviction and play it professionally and play it as though it is literally our bread and butter. It's our job. But just being able to wear that hat, take on that role, even if whether you're that person off the stage or not. When we're on stage, we've got to be convincing.
Sure.
So just to interject.
Right. Great. So that brings us to number 5. What would you say would be the 5th thing? You only have 5 things. What would be number 5?
Wow. I'll call this. Let's just call it the setup. And what I mean by this, there's our posture, the way we hold the instrument, the way we sit, the way we, body usage, being mindful of literally, just tension. Tension is the enemy of music. I often have new students, say that several times in a row, very emphatically, and just say, look, I'm not you. I'm not in your body. I don't know if you're holding your shoulders too tight. I don't know if you've got if you're kind of holding yourself. I can see certain things, but it's important to make sure that, of course, you from your hips to the top of your head, virtually no difference between that standing and sitting. Most of the time we're sitting when we play as tuba players. Euphonium players generally tend to stand for solos, and some there's a few tubas that stand for solos, but standing, of course, is probably the best breathing position to be in. But we want to emulate that as much as we can when we're seated, holding our instruments, but also being sure that we bring the instruments to us, and that we're not, going to the horn. And of course, most students can't pick the instrument they play, and they're in varying states of condition as well. So instrument maintenance, also take care of your gear, and it will take care of you. Part of that being consistent, keeping things even, is making sure that the valves are well lubricated, not only for lubrication but for protection of the instrument itself. If the oil breaks down, the viscosity breaks down, you got metal on metal, your valves aren't going to last very long, and they're going to start to wear down and get worse and leak more. And so slides, making sure that everything is well maintained, well lubricated, making sure that the valve alignment itself is pretty close and true, so that we've got easy access to each of those bugles. So that there's not so much of a difference between this and that. Just to give you another little quick story, I went and took this was the first Boston audition. There were 3, of course. And on my way to Boston the first time, I stopped through Chicago. I had an invitation from Michael Mulcahy, second trombonist in Chicago Symphony, to play for him. We had gotten to know each other doing a little bit of chamber music with Chamber Music Northwest out here in Portland. And he said, yeah, if you're taking that audition in Boston, you want to stop through Chicago to play for me. And I took him up on it. Unfortunately, I had a little bit of trouble with the flight out there, and I think my horn might have taken a bad hit, and I had a valve that was sticking a little bit on me. And so I don't know if it's still there, but I stopped at the brass bow.
So it's actually not there. I'm just going to interject real quick.
Sure.
Because I was playing in Oregon with you a couple of days before the Boston audition. So I was on a flight pretty much right after you on my way to Boston. So I remember this very well. But I used to work at the Brass Bow when I lived in Chicago. And the owner back then, Wayne Tanabe, is, one of the guy at Yamaha. But I used to work for Wayne at the Brass Bow. But anyway, I remember this well. But please continue.
Oh no, no, perfect. This is a nice little perfect bow that we're tying here. As far as the story, so I go to the Brass Bow, and I have them service my instrument, and Wayne, I guess they noticed. I think maybe it was Ian Robinson was the person that was actually doing the work for me, but Wayne was there, and I'm not sure if it was Wayne or Ian, but one of them suggested, hey, I noticed that your valves are a little bit out of alignment. We can do like a precision alignment for you. While we're here. And I was thinking, really, what's that? And of course, they just described that. We go through the board scopes, just make sure everything is, in the both of the up and the downstroke is really, on point. And we use a material that changes less over time in terms of being beaten down. The felts, that kind of thing. I think they were using like some closed cell foam material. And I was like, but he said, but at the same time, you've got an audition coming up, so we don't want to make any drastic changes to your gear, but we can always put it back. And so I was like, sure, go for it. So the next day, I show up and I play the horn, and I was just like, whoa. And they were and I think my look, he was worried for a second. He said, no, this is great. This feels so even and so consistent now compared to the way it was before. And went to Boston, and of course, no one won that first audition, but me and Steve Campbell were the final two standing candidates. So it didn't hurt. I just put it that way. It didn't hurt anything.
I think it served you pretty well. That's. But it's such a great story to hear, and I never expected. I would have never expected for you to talk about maintenance and your setup. And again, I just want to stress that this really ties into a picture of the complete professional musician, because you definitely do spend a lot of time maintaining decent amount of money, maintaining your instruments. Obviously, if it's your livelihood, you do have to approach it like you do your practice sessions and your performances. You have to have that same level of seriousness. So I just think it's really fantastic that you're talking about it. Low brass instruments, they're longer tubes. We have more valves. There's more that can go wrong. There's more that has to be maintained. Quite frankly, when you go to repair techs, there are some wonderful repair techs all over the country. Just about any major city and everywhere in between, you can find great repair techs. But sometimes you may not really have somebody that has a lot of experience beyond school tubas, beyond school euphoniums. So, it's something that you definitely have to take very seriously. So I certainly appreciate you talking about that. When it comes to just trying to be really, really, really relaxed, is there anything that you use as a way to remind yourself of that?
I think, first off, with the normal, I like to stay, these days it's kind of tough because, at least around here, I think the gyms are closed for right now because we're a bit on the pause because of the pandemic. But, just staying physically active, in some shape or form, weight training, cardiovascular, walking, jogging, elliptical machines, some sort of cardio. This stuff allows us to kind of give the muscles a nice little workout. Exercise is just good for life. It just gives you a higher quality and a higher standard of life, first off, and and it helps you with the breathing. Obviously, if you're in there, you're running or you're doing something, you're exerting yourself. So you're increasing your physical strength. You pick these things up, increasing the wind, so you can fill them up. One thing I do is I use, in my case, I'm using some shelf liner on my legs so that I have way less tension in my legs in terms of having to keep the horn at a certain spot, on my leg. I can just kind of put it there relax the legs, there's less tension. I'm much freer that way versus if it wasn't there, I'd have to use a certain amount of muscle engagement, just to hold my horn up.
Right.
So I'm already at a handicap, at a loss in terms of having that relaxation. But again, with the breathing, I also kind of throw some stretches in there to just again remind us of how free how free we want things to be. So that again, and being very, very cautious, especially in the neck and shoulder region, that we have freedom there. I recently I kind of had a slight injury, maybe around my left shoulder or tricep, where it's getting stronger, but definitely I twinged something. But it's amazing, when you're holding a horn, if you adjust slides for intonation, just the way you carry that arm is, I'm trying to just kind of mainly think about the hand and try to let this arm, shoulder relax as much as possible. But invariably, holding the horn and such, there's a little bit of that. And of course, for euphonium players, it's even worse. These instruments just aren't ergonomic. But don't complain too loudly around the string players, because they'll give you because they really have to deal with that. So it may not always be easy, but always trying to find the most easiest way to be relaxed and to just promote and just think, being grounded, being connected to the ground, having everything just feel maybe in a sense heavy in terms of the shoulders, the neck, so that we just find that natural point of relaxation, so that when we're taking in deep breaths, we're not using muscles to breathe, but we're yielding and allowing ourselves to just freely take in the wind. And, a lot of wind, a lot of talking today. So,
No, this is wonderful. Yeah. So it sounds like so much of it is just being aware of where tension,
where it all starts. Yeah.
Being aware of where tension could potentially be. So wonderful. So JáTtik has been wonderful today. This is another one of those sessions where as soon as we're done with the recording, I'm going to start practicing, and I'm going to start trying to implement as many of these things that we've been talking about for the rest of the day. So tell us how we can find you today. Obviously, you're very busy with teaching and performing with the symphony. Can we find you online? Do you have any events, whether virtual or hopefully as soon as we can in person, where we can look out for you?
Well, not that this is a point of pride, but I'm not on Facebook. I at least not as of yet.
Well, after the video is posted, you will be, but.
Well, I don't have my own page. I'll put it that way.
Right.
And I don't check it. Of course, I can maybe I'll give you like my email address, and we can maybe post that or something at the end of the video.
Well, I don't know if we want to do that right away, but I'll tell you what we can do as a friend of a show, as my personal friend. We'll definitely try to update our audience on what you're up to as much as we can through our own Facebook page. And you're active with the is it the Oregon Symphony Brass Quintet that does Facebook Live concerts, or?
What I was going to say is, of course, you can go to orsymphony.org, Oregon Symphony, and follow me there in terms of what's happening orchestrally. And yes, the Brass Quintet, we've done a few things, especially now in the pandemic, being a smaller group that can play outside during winter conditions. It's pretty much us. We're the only ones that are able to do that. So you'll probably catch us doing some things here and there. I have another quintet that I play with, the Rose City Brass Quintet, and we have I think a Facebook presence at Rose City Brass Company, and we've done some online recitals, put up some Christmas tunes that we just sight read just for a holiday, nice little stocking stuffer, oral stocking stuffer. And I know we're talking about our next recital and what we want to do, and so we try to do maybe one or two recitals a year. And these days they're going to be online, so you can again follow us there at Rose City Brass Company as well.
Great. Man, you are a busy tuba player, which is great.
I'm very lucky, very fortunate.
Well, I was just going to say, it's wonderful that all the musicians that I've talked to or interviewed during the pandemic, staying busy, finding a way to stay busy, excuse me. So looking forward to it being over so we can do a follow-up with you in person. I'll come out to Portland, one of my favorite places to visit. Voodoo Donuts, by the way, we have a Voodoo Donuts in Houston now. And I've been there probably a dozen times. But anyway, I cannot thank you enough, JáTtik. We really, really, really appreciate your time. This is going to be very helpful, and we're looking for the many great things that I'm sure you'll be contributing as we go forward.
Thanks again for having me. I hope it's helpful. You know, I am indebted and humbled, obviously, again, to the people that came before, and you know, lots of wonderful influences. YouTube is an amazing application utilized well. There's a lot of great stuff out there. You know, it used to be that, you know, we'd have to get these CDs or you have to go to the library to check things out, and now everything, you know, I'd almost say things are maybe a little too available, and what I mean by that is that we take it for granted. And you know, if this past year has taught us anything, it's that music, especially, you know, we can't take the arts for granted. You know, it really, you know, it really can just go away. And,
right.
And what would you do? So I just want everybody to be mindful of that. You know, many of us aren't able to play, but you know, we're still making a living one way or another. You know, trying to, you know, keep things moving. So don't forget your art. Don't forget your arts organizations. You know, whichever ones that are, you know, mean something to you. You know, try to support them as best you can, and just remember that at some point we will be back. So take this time as an opportunity to reflect, self-reflect, improve the skills, keep working hard, and just stay positive, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.